Picture a city that calls itself the greatest on earth. Now fill it with 150,000 people who have nowhere to sleep tonight and no one who will look for them if they disappear. Add gas lamps that barely push back the dark, cobblestones slick with whatever washed out of the tenements above. Pigs, still in 1878, yes, pigs, rooting through trash heaps in alleyways while the newspapers publish illustrations of the Brooklyn Bridge going up. That magnificent, impossible thing. Steel cables strung across the sky like the future arriving early. That's New York. The gilded part and the rotten part sharing the same 23 miles of island, separated sometimes by as little as a single block. A city where you could see a Vanderbilt's mansion on Fifth Avenue in the morning and watch a woman die of starvation in a Cherry Street basement by evening. A place where fortunes were made before breakfast and destroyed before dinner. Where the police were the law was for sale, and the price was whatever you had. We're going there tonight. Not to the mansions, not to the opera house, not to Delmonico's restaurant where you could spend $40 on a single meal while a 40-cent a day factory girl sewed your wife's dress in a room with no windows. We're going to the Tenderloin. We're going to the part of the city that made certain men very rich and kept certain women very poor, and made absolutely sure that the two groups never had to look each other in the eye. We're going to follow one night, one person, every smell, every sound, every moment of fear and calculation and exhaustion and strange defiant pride that came with surviving in a city that did not particularly want you to survive. I make these history stories, and honestly, I genuinely don't know if you're listening to fall asleep or because you're the kind of person who lies awake at 3 a.m. thinking about structural injustice and the specific mechanics of 19th century police corruption. Either way, welcome. Both are valid. Subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Here we go. The first thing you need to understand is that the arrangement was not secret. That's what makes it interesting. This isn't a story about hidden crimes in dark rooms. This is a story about a system that operated openly, that everyone in power knew about, that the newspapers occasionally wrote about, and the politicians occasionally complained about, and that continued without meaningful interruption for roughly 40 years. The arrangement was this. If you wanted to work the streets of the Tenderloin district in Manhattan, and by work the streets, I mean exactly what you think I mean, you paid the police. Not occasionally. Not when you got caught. Every single week, in cash, to a specific officer, in a specific amount, according to a schedule that was as regular and bureaucratic as a subscription to a magazine. Women who worked independently, meaning without a brothel or a concert saloon to operate through, paid somewhere between $1 and $2 a week. Women who work through a house paid indirectly, through the madam, who paid between $30 and $50 a month depending on the size of her operation and the block she was on. The money moved upward, from the individual woman to the wardman, the beat officer assigned to collect it, from the wardman to the precinct captain, from the precinct captain to the inspector, from the inspector to, well, to wherever money went when it reached the top of the New York City Police Department in 1878. You want names? I'll give you names. Captain Alexander Williams, 42nd Precinct, 29th Precinct. Known throughout New York as Clubber Williams, because his preferred method of dealing with anyone who annoyed him was a hickory club applied with enthusiasm to the skull. Clubber Williams arrived at the 29th Precinct in 1876 and allegedly said, loud enough that other officers heard and repeated it for decades. "I've been living on chuck steak long enough. Now I'm going to have a bit of tenderloin." And that, historians generally agree, is where the neighbourhood got its name. The Tenderloin, the fancy cut, the profitable part, the area running roughly from 24th Street to 42nd Street, between 5th and 7th Avenues. The place where the concert saloons and the panel houses and the gambling dens and the brothels were densest and most profitable and most generously taxed by the men who were supposed to be suppressing them. Clubber Williams eventually retired with a house in Connecticut and a yacht. On a policeman's salary. Nobody seemed to find this strange, officially. Some people found it very strange, unofficially. But we'll get to them later. Right now, we need to go back to the street. Your feet hurt. That's the first thing, always, by this hour. It's past 11, which you know not from a clock, but from the change in the street. The working crowd thinning, the drunk crowd thickening, the gas lamps on 7th Avenue throwing yellow circles on the wet cobblestones that make everything look slightly feverish. Your feet hurt because the boots you're wearing were not designed for standing on stone for 6 hours. They were designed for someone else entirely, someone who perhaps had slightly wider feet or slightly narrower feet. You've never been sure which. And the leather has rubbed 2 blisters on your right heel that you stopped feeling around 9 o'clock, which is not a good sign but is also, in a practical sense, a relief. Your name is Mary. Mary Coogan. 22 years old, though you'd tell anyone who asked that you were 19. You've been in New York for 14 months, which is long enough to have lost the habit of looking up at buildings and feeling amazed, and not long enough to have stopped noticing the smell. The smell right now is horse manure. First, always horse manure because this is a city of 200,000 horses and they go where they please. Then coal smoke settling down from the tenement chimneys above, a low grey smell that coats the inside of your nose. Then something from the alley 20 feet to your left that you have learned to identify as the particular odour of a building where someone has been boiling cabbage every day for 40 years, the smell having soaked into the brick itself and become permanent. Then your own smell, sweat, and the cheap violet water you put on at the beginning of the evening that wore off around 8 and left behind something more honest. And underneath all of it, when the wind shifts from the east, the Hudson River, dark water, mud, the faint salt edge of the harbour 4 miles south, where the ships come in from everywhere else. You've been standing on this particular corner since 5:45. Your back aches from standing. Your fingers, even inside the gloves that are 2 sizes too big and smell like someone else's perfume, have gone from cold to numb to a strange kind of buzzing that means they'll hurt properly once the temperature drops further. It is October 1878. It is the 3rd year of what the newspapers are calling the Long Depression, though it started in 1873 and doesn't seem interested in ending. It is a city of enormous wealth and comprehensive misery, distributed with an elegance that would be almost mathematical if mathematics were cruel. And somewhere behind you, on the other side of the block, someone's boot heel is clicking on cobblestones in a specific rhythm that you have learned over 14 months to recognize before you consciously register recognizing it. You know that sound. You know exactly who makes that sound. You don't turn around. Officer Patrick Doyle is 31 years old, Irish by way of County Clare, been on the force for 7 years, and he weighs approximately 220 pounds, none of which appears to be regret. He comes from the direction of 27th Street, working his beat from 6th Avenue to 7th, and he does it every Tuesday and Friday between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., which everyone on this stretch of pavement knows, because his schedule has not varied in 18 months. He stops about 4 feet to your right. You can smell him before he speaks. Tobacco, and the particular sour-sweet smell of a man who has been drinking since his shift started and has not moved far enough or fast enough to sweat it out. There's something else under that. Boot polish. He is meticulous about his boots. You've noticed this before. Whatever else Officer Doyle does or doesn't care about, his boots are always polished to a mirror shine. Coogan. Not a question, not a greeting, just your name, said the way you'd say the name of a street you were looking for on a map. Officer. A pause. You hear him shift his weight. The squeak of his belt leather. The small sounds of a large man adjusting his position. Quiet night. Yes, you say. Another pause. This is the part where some of the newer girls, the ones who came out of the factories 6 months ago and thought this was temporary, thought they'd be back at a sewing machine by spring, sometimes try to fill the silence, try to be agreeable, try to make conversation as if this were a normal interaction between a citizen and a public servant. You stopped doing that a long time ago. Sullivan says you're late, Doyle says. Sullivan is the wardman. Doyle is the wardman's collector on this block, meaning Doyle is the middle tier of a 3-tier arrangement that neither of them would ever describe in those terms, or in any terms, in any place where it might be written down. I'm not late, you say. You're not. You paid Sullivan on Monday, on schedule, the same as you have every Monday since your 3rd week on this block. $1.50, which is $1 more than you paid 2 blocks west on 25th Street, which was a cheaper block, a more dangerous block, the block where the women who couldn't pay the premium rate worked under street lamps that the city had somehow never gotten around to repairing. The premium on 27th is for the proximity to the concert saloons. The men who come out of the saloons at 11 at midnight walking in pairs, coats open despite the cold because the saloons are hot and they haven't felt the temperature yet. Those men have spent money already and are inclined to spend more. The proximity is worth the extra 50 cents. Sullivan says you were short Monday, Doyle says. You were not short Monday. You know this with the absolute certainty of someone who has counted every coin before handing it over for 14 months, and made sure to count it again out loud, in front of Sullivan, in a way that made it clear you knew the amount and he knew the amount, and you both knew there would be no confusion later. There is always confusion later. I wasn't short, you say. I counted it in front of him. $1.50. He put it in his left coat pocket. Silence. The boot heel shifts on the cobblestones. You hear Doyle breathe out through his nose, a long, slow exhalation that isn't quite a sigh and isn't quite a laugh. He says 25 cents short. Here is the thing about 25 cents. In 1878 New York, 25 cents is what a day labourer makes in roughly an hour. It is the price of a cheap dinner at a lager beer saloon, if you eat standing up and don't order anything that could be described as meat. It is the price of a seat in the cheapest gallery of one of the cheaper theatres. It is not nothing. But the amount doesn't matter. You understand that. You understood it the first time this happened, 6 weeks after you started working this block, when Sullivan told you that you were a quarter short and you argued, and he listened to you argue with an expression of such complete boredom that you understood arguing was simply not the point. The point was, he could say you were short whenever he wanted. He could say you were short by a quarter or by $1 or by $5, and you would pay it, or you would not work this block, or you would be arrested. A charge so easy to make and so difficult to disprove that the arithmetic of resistance was always the same. You reach into the small bag you carry and find the coin. You hold it out. Doyle doesn't move for a moment. Then he takes it. His fingers are warm. You notice this because yours have stopped being warm. He takes the quarter and puts it in his coat pocket without looking at it. "Good girl," he says. He walks away. His boots click on the cobblestones with that same metronomic rhythm, east on 27th, and the sound fades, and you stand in the cold and feel something that is not quite anger and not quite resignation. Something that has lived in your chest for 14 months and does not have a clean name. You turn back to the street. The night is just beginning. People ask sometimes. Not the officers, not the men who come off the saloon steps. They don't ask, they're not interested in origin stories. But sometimes, in the specific quiet of a certain kind of night, a woman standing nearby will ask, or a woman you're sharing space with in one of the cheap rooming houses will ask, and the question is always the same. How did you end up here? The honest answer is, the same way as almost everyone else. You came from Utica. There are so many women on this street from Utica, or from Buffalo, or from some farm outside Albany, that has a name nobody in New York has ever heard of, that it has become a kind of dark joke. We should make a banner, a woman named Bridget told you once in your third week. Welcome to the Tenderloin, formerly of upstate New York. You came because your father's farm failed in 1874. You came because the railroads had changed the price of wheat, and the bank held the mortgage, and by 1876 there was nothing left to come from. You came because your aunt in Brooklyn wrote that there was factory work in Manhattan, good honest work, piece rate at a shirtwaist factory on Grand Street, and that was enough for a 17-year-old girl with no other options to pack a bag and take the train. The factory work was real. For 8 months you sewed seams on shirtwaists at a rate of 6 cents per dozen, which sounds like nothing until you understand that a skilled woman could do 15 dozen in a day, which is 90 cents, which was not actually nothing in 1876. It was enough for the rooming house on Hester Street and food, and the occasional extravagance of a newspaper, which you read on Sundays cover to cover, because it contained the city outside the walls of the factory and the walls of the rooming house. Then the factory cut rates, not dramatically, not in a way that made headlines. They simply announced one morning that piece rates would be 4.5 cents per dozen instead of 6, effective immediately. And the women who objected were told there was a line of women from the street who would gladly take their seats. You were not fired. You kept sewing. You were making 67 cents a day instead of 90, which meant the rooming house was suddenly slightly more than you could afford if you also wanted to eat. You found a cheaper rooming house, then a cheaper one, then a basement room on Mulberry Street that cost 30 cents a night and smelled like a building that had flooded twice and never properly dried out. Your roommate in that basement was a woman named Kathleen who'd been a typewriter at a law firm until the firm closed. Before her was a woman named Agnes, whose story you never fully heard because Agnes was there for 3 days and then gone, and the landlord, when you asked, looked at you with an expression that suggested the question was naive. The factory laid off half its workforce in March 1877. Business had declined. Prices had declined. The Long Depression had its hand on everything. You were in the half that was laid off. There are, in New York in 1877, approximately no jobs available for a woman with a strong back and quick fingers, and no connections and no husband. There is domestic service, if you can get it, which requires a reference from your previous employer and your previous employer closed. There is laundry work which pays 25 cents a day if you can stand the steam and the lye burns. There is garment finishing that you can do in your room if you have a room for 2 cents per piece. There is going home if home still exists. Home didn't still exist. The farm was gone. Your aunt in Brooklyn had 5 children and a husband who worked the docks when the docks had work. You spent 6 weeks trying everything you could think of. You learned things about New York in those 6 weeks that the people on Fifth Avenue never had to learn. Which church missions gave out food without demanding you attend a sermon first? Which cheap lodging houses let you sleep in the hall if you didn't have enough for a bed? How long you could sit in the warmth of a saloon on a cold day before someone asked you to order something? You didn't choose the street because you wanted to. Nobody does. You chose it because the arithmetic of survival in New York City in 1877 left at a certain point. No other choices that involve staying alive. That's the story. It's not interesting. It's not tragic in a grand operatic way. It's the story of 30,000 women in this city at this exact moment. The same story with different names and different factory names and different cities of origin. It is so common that the men who run the city have had to build a bureaucratic apparatus to manage it. The arrangement with the police is partly that apparatus. You're standing in the cold on 27th Street and you understand this now in a way you didn't 14 months ago. The system is not an accident. The system is designed. Not designed in a room by men with blueprints. Not intentionally designed, but evolved over decades into something that functions with the smooth efficiency of a piece of machinery. The police take money. The politicians take money from the police. The real estate men take money from the madams. The bail bondsmen take money from the arrested. The magistrates fine you. The money flows upward. You are at the bottom. The machinery works perfectly. Walk with me for a moment. Come off the corner of 27th and 7th and walk north. And let me show you what this district actually looks like. This is 1878. The Tenderloin is not, I want to be clear about this, not a slum. The slums are downtown, 5 Points, the 4th Ward, the streets around Mulberry Bend where Jacob Rees will come in 12 years with his camera and his flash powder to photograph the misery for people uptown who have never seen it and prefer, on some level, to keep it that way. Those are the real slums. Overcrowded, disease-ridden, with 14 people in a room meant for 2. The Tenderloin is something different. The Tenderloin is the commerce district of vice. It is the neighbourhood where the city's demand for things that the city officially prohibits is met by the city's supply of people who will provide those things, and where the transaction is taxed by the city's police, who are themselves employees of the city. It's Midtown. Walk north from 27th and you pass the Grand Opera House. You pass decent restaurants. You pass hotels that respectable people stay in. This is not an abandoned corner of the city. This is a very active, very commercially vibrant corner of the city where the legitimate and the illegitimate coexist with an intimacy that the legitimate side pretends not to notice. The concert saloons are the heart of it. In 1878, Manhattan has somewhere between 300 and 500 concert saloons. The exact number depends on how loosely you define concert saloon, which is itself a category that the law defines loosely, probably on purpose. A concert saloon is, officially, a place where you can drink beer and watch a performance. The performance might be a singer, might be an acrobat, might be a magician, might be a woman in a short skirt dancing on a small stage to a piano, that hasn't been tuned since the Buchanan administration. The beer is real. The concert is real. What happens in the back rooms and upstairs and in the booths along the walls is technically illegal and practically routine. The saloons on 7th Avenue are the upper tier, gaslit with mirrors behind the bar and painted ceilings and a genuine orchestra on weekends. The waitress girls in these places wear actual uniforms, a specific kind, red or blue or green, depending on the establishment, with a white apron, and they receive wages $3 to $5 a week, which is supplemented by a commission on every drink they persuade a customer to buy. A waitress girl in a decent concert saloon on 7th Avenue might make $12, $15 a week in a good week, and she might go home at 2 in the morning and sleep in a room she rents and never do anything more than flirt. Or she might do more. That's her business. Down on 6th Avenue, 1 block west, the saloons are cheaper, dirtier, less pretentious about the concert part of the arrangement. The beer costs 5 cents instead of 8, and the women who work there are not called waitress girls because there's no pretense maintained about what the job actually involves. And then there are the streets between, like 27th, like the dozens of other blocks in this district where women who don't work through any establishment work independently, which means they have no madam to pay the tribute on their behalf, which means they pay it directly, which means they are the most economically exposed people in an economically precarious neighbourhood. That's where you work. That's where most of the women who get arrested work. That's important. Remember that. The women in the establishments, the concert saloon girls and the brothel workers and the panel house residents, they are somewhat protected by the tribute their employers pay. The arrangement is reliable, structured, bureaucratic. A madame who pays her monthly $35 is paying for a kind of commercial peace. The police do not generally arrest her girls if she's current on her payments. The women on the streets have no such umbrella. They pay their $1.50 a week, and they get a certain amount of leave me alone in return, but that leave me alone is not contractual. It is not guaranteed. It lasts exactly as long as nothing goes wrong, as long as no new officer needs to make his numbers for the month, as long as no politician is running for something and needs to perform a crackdown for the newspapers. As long as you have the quarter Sullivan decides you owe him on a Tuesday night in October. The second you don't have it, or the second someone decides you don't have it even if you do, the arrangement dissolves, and the machinery that was supposed to protect you becomes the machinery that punishes you. The block has a smell at midnight that's different from the smell at 9. At 9, the coal smoke from the supper fires is still thick, and the streets are loud with the transition from daytime to nighttime commerce, and the smell is active. Cooking food, burning fuel, the acetylene of the street vendors' lamps. By midnight, the supper fires have gone cold. The vendors have packed up. What's left is purer, the cold air coming off the Hudson 2 blocks west, carrying the river's muddy darkness. The horse manure freezing slightly in the gutter. The sour smell of spilled beer from the saloon half a block north. A smell that doesn't come from any one source but seems to rise from the pavement itself, soaked into the stone over years. And something sweeter underneath, which you identified only after several months, with the help of a woman named Francesca, who had grown up on this block and knew every smell in it. It's the smell of a bakery, 2 streets over, that starts its ovens at 11 p.m. for the morning bread. The yeast and the heat reaching even here, even through the other smells. Francesca said on bad nights she would stand on the corner and breathe through her nose and concentrate on just that smell, just the bread. You've adopted this. It sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. You need to understand what a wardman is, because the wardman is the most important figure in your life, and also a figure that almost no one in uptown New York has ever heard of or would know how to describe. A wardman is a detective assigned to a specific precinct whose job is, technically, to gather intelligence about the precinct's criminal activity. He's supposed to know who is operating what kind of business, where, and on what scale. He's supposed to report this information upward so that it can be used to enforce the law. In practice, in 1878 New York, the wardman's job is to maintain the arrangements. His name is Detective John Sullivan, not the boxer. That John L. Sullivan is still 4 years from winning his first major championship, and in any case doesn't weigh 260 pounds of deliberate intimidation the way this Sullivan does. This Sullivan is 44 years old. He's been a detective for 11 years. He's been the wardman for this precinct for 6. He has, in those 6 years, built a network of relationships so dense and so thoroughly understood by everyone involved that it runs, most weeks, with almost no friction. Sullivan doesn't look like a villain. This is important and disappointing. He looks like a man who works hard and likes his dinner and gets tired at the end of a long day. He's not particularly mean. He's not sadistic. He doesn't enjoy hurting people in any way that seems personal. He is, as far as you can tell, simply a man who's found a job that pays well and that he is very good at, and who experiences no particular moral distress about the job. This is, in some ways, more frightening than cruelty. Cruelty has a personality. You can study it. You can predict it. Sullivan's indifference is structural. It belongs to the system rather than to him. You pay Sullivan on Mondays, at a specific location, the back bar of a saloon called the Continental, on 26th between 6th and 7th, between 7 and 9 p.m., not the front bar. The back bar, which has 3 stools and bad light, and a barman named Egan, who is the third point in the arrangement's local triangle. The exchange takes approximately 30 seconds. You sit at the stool. You put your hand on the bar. Egan puts a glass of beer in front of you, which you do not drink because you're not there for beer. Sullivan, if he is there already, sits 1 stool away. If he is not there, you wait. You do not make conversation. You do not look at the other people in the back bar, most of whom are also women waiting to pay Sullivan, though you don't acknowledge this because acknowledging it would make it too visible even for a transaction conducted in a semi-public bar. When Sullivan arrives, he sits. He doesn't look at you. He puts his hand on the bar next to the glass that Egan has placed in front of his empty stool, and you put the money under his hand. He picks it up without looking at it. He puts it somewhere. He picks up his beer. He drinks. You can leave. The whole thing takes 30 seconds, as I said. It is the most efficient transaction in your week. What you are paying for, technically, is nothing. There is no receipt. There is no contract. Sullivan will not, if asked in a court of law, confirm that this arrangement exists. What you are paying for, practically, is the absence of a specific kind of attention. You are paying for Sullivan not to look at you with the look he gives to women who have not paid, which is the look of a man who has just noticed something that needs to be dealt with. You are paying for the right to exist on a public street without being arrested for existing on a public street. The law, specifically Section 887 of the New York State Code of Criminal Procedure, makes it a crime to loiter or be common in a way that annoys or disturbs the public. The law is so broad that it could theoretically be applied to almost any behaviour a police officer decides to apply it to. It is practically applied to women who have not paid. A woman who has paid is not annoying the public. A woman who has not paid is annoying the public. The distinction is not moral, it is financial. Here is the full economy of the arrangement as you have come to understand it over 14 months, because understanding it is the only way to survive it. You pay Sullivan $1.50 per week. That is $6 a month. In a year, that is $72. $72 is more than a factory girl makes in 3 months. It is a very large proportion of whatever you make in a month, because what you make in a month is not a fixed amount and not a large amount, and is subject to weather and season and the particular rhythms of the city's commerce in ways that are outside your control. From Sullivan's collections on his patch, and Sullivan's patch includes roughly 4 blocks, and by generous estimate somewhere between 30 and 50 women working independently at any given time, plus a handful of small houses. Sullivan collects somewhere between $200 and $300 a week. Call it $1,000 a month. Sullivan's salary as a detective is approximately $75 a month. The rest, the $925 more or less, year flows upward. Not all of it to Sullivan, some to Doyle and the other collectors, some to the precinct captain. The captain's portion goes to the inspector. The inspector's portion goes to the commissioner's office, or to the Tammany Hall ward boss who controls the patronage appointments in this district, or to a combination of both. The exact amounts, the exact percentages, these aren't known, even to the people in the middle of the system, because the system is deliberately opaque. What's known is Clubber Williams, when he eventually faces a departmental inquiry, will report owning property in Connecticut worth approximately $250,000 on a career salary that totals at most $30,000. Nobody will be able to explain the discrepancy. Nobody will officially try very hard. But here in 1878, 6 years before the Lexo Committee starts asking these questions, the system is not under any meaningful scrutiny. The system is the water you swim in. The Monday payment has its own specific texture that you have memorized in all its physical details because repetition carves deep grooves. The Continental smells as you push through the door like sawdust and tobacco, and the specific smell of a bar that has been washing its glasses in the same water all night. The sawdust on the floor is fresh on Mondays. By Thursday it will be packed grey and wet with a week of spilled beer and tracked-in mud and things you try not to identify closely. On Mondays it is pale yellow, and it squeaks slightly under your boot heels as you walk. The front bar is warm, too warm after the cold of the street, and your nose floods immediately with the smells layered in the heated air. First dominant, then tobacco, 6 men with clay pipes, producing a low rolling cloud that drifts in the draught from the door. Then something cooked, a meat smell from the kitchen behind the back wall, probably pork, probably nothing you'd order if ordering with a point. You don't stop at the front bar. You move through the men gathered along its length, mostly labourers off the construction sites and the docks, men whose hands are still dark with the day's work, some of them still in their work coats because they came here directly from the site and haven't been home, and push through the narrow doorway at the back into the back bar's colder, quieter space. 3 stools, low gaslight, Egan behind the bar, a thin man who seems to be made entirely of patience and wrist strength from pouring drinks. He looks up when you come in and nods fractionally. There are two women already there. You know them. Agnes Carver from somewhere in New Jersey, been on the block 3 months longer than you. Beside her, a woman you know only as Dutch, whose real name is apparently Wilhelmina, and who finds this amusing and does not mind. Dutch is 40, which is old for this street, and she knows things about the arrangement that took you months to figure out and told them to you without being asked, which you have not forgotten. It was Dutch who explained about the quarter shortfalls. They do it every 6 weeks or so, she said months ago, in a flat informational way, as though describing the arrival schedule of a streetcar. Just to remind you they can. Pay it. Don't argue. It's cheaper than the alternative and it doesn't come out of your teeth. You sat on the end stool. Egan put the glass of beer in front of you without being asked. You put your hands on the bar and felt the bar's surface. Sticky at the edges, slightly gritty under your palms, the worn smooth groove along the front where a century of elbows has polished the wood to something close to velvet. Sullivan came in at 7:45. He always comes in at 7:45 in the winter. Summer, when the days are longer and his rounds take more time because more women are working, and the collections take longer, he comes in at 8. He sat. Egan put his glass down. Sullivan's hand on the bar, broad square fingers, short nails, a scar across the knuckles of his right hand from something he'd never explained and nobody had ever asked about. You put the money under his hand, felt it go, left. The whole thing took slightly less time than it takes to boil water, and you had paid, in 1 minute, the equivalent of 3 days of factory work for the privilege of standing on a public sidewalk for the following week without being arrested. This is what you think about walking back out through the front bar and into the cold Monday street. 3 days. Every week, the first 3 working days of your week are spent earning back what you paid on Monday. Wednesday morning is when you start working for yourself. The calculation has become automatic. You don't feel anger about it anymore, or not fresh anger. The anger is there, but it's old, and it lives low in your chest like the banked coals of a fire that doesn't need tending. You've been inside the buildings. This is important. The street is one tier of this world, but the buildings have their own texture, their own arrangements, their own economies that interlace with yours. The concert saloon closest to your block is called the Emerald Garden, which sounds Irish, but is run by a German man named Brower, who came to New York in 1860 and spent 18 years perfecting the art of the lucrative grey area. The Emerald Garden is on 7th Avenue, large enough to hold perhaps 150 people at the small round tables, with a stage at the far end where a woman sings from 9 to 11, and an orchestra of 4 men plays through the evening. The orchestra is real. The singer is real. The waitress girls who move between the tables in their green-trimmed uniforms, one of whom has, on 2 separate occasions, offered you work, are real, and their wages are real, and their situation is, in the particular calculus of this world, somewhat better than yours. Mrs. Brower, Brower's wife, who has a first name but is never called it by anyone on this block, simply Mrs. Brower, delivered with a specific kind of deference that indicates she has earned it. Mrs. Brower handles the arrangement for the establishment. She pays the precinct captain's runner directly, $35 a month, cash, delivered in a brown envelope to the same runner who collects from 7 other establishments on this block. She pays it on the 1st of the month. She has never been arrested. Her girls have collectively been arrested twice in the past 3 years, both times because a specific politician needed a specific headline before a specific election, and both times the charges were dropped within 24 hours. This is the protection that $35 a month buys. It is not perfect protection, but it is structural. It is reliable. It turns Mrs. Brower's legal situation from something precarious into something almost stable, which in this city in 1878 is a form of luxury. You sat in the Emerald Garden once in your second month, not as an employee, but because a woman named Cecilia had offered to buy you a beer and tell you things you needed to know. Cecilia had been a waitress girl there for 2 years, and was considering whether she wanted to keep being one. "The money's all right," Cecilia said. She had a way of talking that sounded like she was always slightly surprised by the conclusions she was reaching. "Better than a factory. You're on your feet all night, and Brower watches the clock like it's his child, but you're warm and there's food in the kitchen if you're on the right side of the cook." "What's the downside?" you asked. "The downside?" She held up her beer. "The downside is Brower takes 20% of your commissions on the drinks, and he's counting the bottles so you can't fudge the numbers, and Mrs. Brower watches how you dress and how you talk to the customers, and if she decides you're doing something in a way that reflects badly on the establishment, she has a very quiet conversation with you that ends in you not working there anymore." "And outside the establishment," you said, "after hours?" Cecilia looked at you with an expression that was not quite pity. "What you do after hours is your own business," she said. "Mrs. Brower doesn't ask. But if you get arrested and it comes out where you don't work there anymore. That's the rule. Keep it separate, keep it invisible." You asked her why she was considering leaving. "Because I'm 26, she said, "and I've been on my feet 8 hours a night for 2 years, and my ankles look like a woman who's been on her feet 8 hours a night for 2 years, and I don't know if I'm building toward anything." She looked out the window of the Emerald Garden at 7th Avenue, passing in the October dark. "Some of the girls here have been here for 4-5 years, she said. "They're doing okay, I suppose. But okay has a ceiling, and the ceiling is low." You finished your beer and thanked her and walked back out onto 27th. The warm air of the saloon had been a contrast so sharp it felt almost physical. Stepping back into the cold, the drop in temperature like walking into a wall of glass. You've thought about that conversation often since then. Cecilia's ceiling. The establishment women had more comfort and more protection than the women on the streets, but they had Brower watching their numbers, and Mrs. Brower watching their demeanour, and the arrangement watching everyone, always through 100 invisible eyes. Different shape of cage. Some of the bars were gilded. The panel houses are different again. Lower tier of establishment, no pretense about the concert. There are perhaps 40 panel houses in the Tenderloin in 1878. The panel in the name refers to a specific architectural feature, a sliding panel in the wall of the room, concealed behind a painting or a curtain, through which a partner of the house can enter and rifle through a customer's coat while he is otherwise occupied. Not all panel houses still use the panel. It's an old trick and men have become somewhat aware of it. But the name has stuck, applied now to any small establishment of 3 to 8 rooms that operates without the pretense of being something else. The women who work in panel houses are paying their madams for the room and the protection, and the madams are paying the precinct. The split varies. What doesn't vary is that the woman in the room keeps less than half of what changes hands in it. You've been inside one. A woman named Margaret, who worked a panel house on 25th, invited you up one afternoon, not For anything but because she wanted company and the house was quiet on weekday afternoons. The room was small, smaller than your rooming house room, which you would not have thought possible. A bed that took up most of the floor, a washstand, one window facing the interior courtyard, not the street, so the light was always the colour of late afternoon regardless of the time. The wallpaper had been red once. Now it was the colour of things that were once red. Margaret sat on the bed and smoked a cigarette and talked about going home to Baltimore, where her mother still lived, and where Margaret maintained, with a persistence that was either hope or delusion, that she was someday going to return. She'd been saying this for 3 years, she admitted without prompting. Baltimore kept not happening. The madam takes 40%, she said, plus I'm paying $12 a month for the room. Plus there's a thing where if a customer damages anything, that comes out of my end. How often does anything get damaged? About once a month, she drew on a cigarette. Funny how that works out. Margaret paid her tribute indirectly through the madam, which meant she didn't sit in Sullivan's back bar on Monday nights. She paid the madam, who paid the precinct runner, who paid Sullivan, who paid upward. More hands in the chain. Less certainty at each step that your money was actually buying what it was supposed to buy. Last month the madam told me the captain had raised his rate, Margaret said. So she was raising everyone's cut-in by $2. Says it's temporary. Is it? She looked at the ceiling. What do you think? Here is what happens when you don't pay. You need to understand this because the threat is the architecture that holds the whole arrangement in place. Without the threat, there is no arrangement. Without the arrest, there is no leverage. Without the leverage, no one pays. So the arrest is the machine's engine. A woman who is not paid, or who is being used to make a point, or whose payment has been declared insufficient, or who has been in the wrong place when the wrong politician needs a headline, is arrested under the loitering statute, section 887. This is not difficult. It requires an officer to observe you standing on a street. That is, in practice, all it requires. You're handcuffed if there's any indication of resistance, which is assessed generously. You're put in the patrol wagon, the Black Maria, they call it, a closed black van drawn by 2 horses that can carry 6 women inside, not comfortably, and that smells of the accumulated fear and confusion of everyone who has ridden in it before. The ride to the precinct station house takes between 5 and 20 minutes depending on where you are in the district. The station house for the 29th precinct is at West 30th Street, a 4-story brick building that was built in 1868 and is already beginning to develop the particular institutional grimness of buildings that are heavily used and minimally maintained. The booking desk is inside to the right, where a sergeant sits under a gas lamp and enters information into a ledger in handwriting that is precise and unhurried. Your name as you give it, or the name you give, because the name you give doesn't have to be your real name, and everyone knows this. Your approximate age. The charge. Section 887. The sergeant is not cruel. He is bored. He has done this so many times that he has achieved a kind of transcendence of boredom. He's beyond boredom, into some state of administrative equanimity. Behind the booking desk is the women's holding cell. It is a room approximately 15 feet by 12, with a bench running around 3 walls and a drain in the floor, and a smell that I won't fully describe but that you could understand in approximately 3 seconds of breathing. It is always occupied. In the course of one night, between 20 and 40 women will pass through this room. You wait. This is the first calculation. Will someone come? Some women have arrangements, not arrangements with the police, and that clearly didn't work, but arrangements with people who expect them. A madam who will send a runner to the station house. A man sometimes who knows where to go and what to do. Somebody who will arrive with money because the next step after the holding cell is the magistrate's court, and the magistrate's court requires bail. Bail for a Section 887 offence is $10. $10 is 2 weeks of factory wages if you have factory work. For a woman who works independently on a street in the Tenderloin, $10 is a week's income on a very good week, and this is not a very good week. The bail bondsman is not a character from outside the arrangement. The bail bondsman is inside it. There are 3 bail bondsmen who work the 29th Precinct Court, and all 3 of them pay a percentage to the sergeant who books the women, and all 3 of them know that on any given night there will be a predictable number of women in that holding cell who need bail and don't have it. The bondsman charges 25 cents on the dollar. He puts up the $10. You owe him $2.50 when the charge is resolved. If you can't pay him back immediately, the interest accumulates at a rate that is discussed only vaguely in terms of when you can manage it, which somehow always means you owe more than you thought. The alternative to bail is waiting for court the next morning in the cell, which some women prefer because it saves the $2.50 and they can sleep on the bench, and court is at 8 a.m. anyway. You've done both. The court is the Jefferson Market courthouse on Greenwich Avenue, a building that was only 3 years old in 1878, the current structure having opened in 1875, and that is remarkably a genuinely beautiful building. Venetian Gothic, red brick with limestone detailing, a clock tower visible for blocks. It looks like a building from a fairy tale. The women's court, as it's known colloquially, is in its lower levels. The magistrate who hears women's cases at the Jefferson Market courthouse in the late 1870s varies depending on the day. But the general template is consistent. A man who's been appointed to the position through Tammany Hall patronage, who is not particularly interested in the cases before him, who will hear 40 to 60 cases in a morning that begins at 8 and needs to be finished by 11 because the magistrate has lunch commitments. The charge is read. The woman pleads. If you plead not guilty, the case is continued. You're either held on bail or released on your own recognizance, which is the magistrate's discretion, which is effectively random. If it's continued, you come back in 2 weeks. The charge will very likely be dropped in 2 weeks, having served its purpose. If you plead guilty, and most women plead guilty, because it ends the thing faster and the alternative isn't better, the fine is $10. $10. Again, if you can pay, you pay. If you can't, you go to Blackwell's Island, the city penitentiary, for a period between 10 days and 6 months at the magistrate's discretion. The island is in the East River. It is accessible only by ferry. It contains, among other institutions, the Women's House of Detention, where the women sent from the Jefferson Market courthouse go. Everyone is afraid of the island. Not because it is dramatically terrible, though the conditions are not good, but because it is the island. Once you are on it, you are removed from the city, from the network you depend on, from any contact with anyone who might help you. You are suspended. You exist in a kind of administrative purgatory, where days pass and you cannot work and you cannot pay, and whatever thin scaffolding of arrangements and relationships and survival strategies you've built in the city stands untended, and by the time you get back, some of it will have collapsed. The women who go to the island often come back to find their room let to someone else, their block occupied by someone else, their place in Sullivan's ledger, metaphorically, taken. You start over. Some women start over many times. Dutch, who told you about the quarter shortfalls, has been to the island twice. She describes it with the flat matter-of-factness she brings to everything, as if it were a particularly unpleasant business trip. Cold in winter, she said, bad food all year. There are women there who've been there before and they look at you like you're new, which you are. Don't get too familiar with anyone. You don't need friends in a place you're trying to leave. You have not been to the island. You intend never to go to the island. This intention costs you $1.50 a week, and whatever extra Sullivan decides to add on when he's feeling acquisitive. It is the most important bill you pay. Back on the corner. It is past midnight now, and the street has changed again. The men from the early saloon crowd have gone home or gone to bed or gone somewhere. What's left on 7th Avenue is a different population. Later, drunker, more deliberate. The men who come by at this hour have already decided what they're looking for. They're not passing through accidentally. The cold has settled in properly. Not the teasing cold of the early evening, that wet October chill that suggested winter without committing to it. This is the cold that means business. It is coming through your coat, through the thin wool of it, finding the gaps at your collar and your wrists. Your feet, in the two big boots, have moved through numb into something that is almost comfortable, which means the cold is affecting your nerve endings, and this is medically not a good sign, but you are not, at midnight on 27th Street, in a position to make medically good decisions. Your hands are in your pockets. You feel in your right pocket the small piece of hard cheese you put there 2 hours ago and forgot about. It has become warm, slightly, from being near your body. You eat it standing up in small bites, not because you are very hungry, but because eating gives you something to do that looks like purposeful occupation rather than loitering, and because the calories matter. The cheese is dry and strong and tastes like everything that cheese that's been in your coat pocket for 2 hours tastes like. It is the best thing you've eaten since the afternoon, when you had a bowl of soup from a lager beer saloon on 26 that cost 3 cents and tasted like someone had waved a bone over hot water and called it beef. This is eating in the Tenderloin at midnight. There are restaurants on 7th Avenue where a man can spend $4 on a dinner with wine, 20 feet from where you're standing. There are restaurants where the smell of roasting meat comes through the air vents onto the street and does something specific to your hunger that you cannot entirely control, a sharpening, a focusing of the body's attention on the gap between what it needs and what is available. You've learned to not walk past those vents after 9 p.m. The gas lamps on 7th flicker when a cart goes by, its wheels on the cobblestone sending a vibration through the stone and up through your boots into the bones of your feet. The vibration reminds you, strangely, of the factory floor, that constant tremor of the machinery, so omnipresent that you stopped noticing it except in its absence, on Sundays when the factory was silent. A man comes off the saloon steps. He's perhaps 40, wearing a good coat, slightly unsteady in a way that means he's been drinking for a while but hasn't tipped over into useless. He stops under the gas lamp and checks his pocket watch, which is gold or gold-plated, and puts it back with the care of someone to whom the watch is important. He looks at you. You meet his eyes for a moment, then look away. This is a language. Every pause, every shift of weight, every direction of gaze is part of a silent negotiation that takes place entirely in the register of implication. Nothing is stated. Nothing is proposed. The city's laws require nothing to be stated. A woman can be arrested for loitering, for annoying the public, for being common, but not for looking at a man or for allowing a man to look at her. Not technically. Not unless an officer decides that the particular combination of elements constitutes an offence, which is an officer's discretion, which cycles back to Sullivan and the quarter and the whole apparatus. The man approaches, stops a few feet away. Cold night. Yes, you say. What follows is a negotiation that you have had, in its various forms, hundreds of times. You're very good at it now in a way that you weren't at the beginning, when you still felt each instance as something specific and individual, when you still felt a version of surprise or self-consciousness. Now it is work, like the factory floor was work, repetitive, physical, requiring attention and skill, producing a result that is necessary and that you are competent to produce. The negotiation is quick. It always is at this hour. The men who come out at midnight have made their decisions before they arrived. You walk west toward 8th Avenue, where there is a rooming house run by a woman named Mrs. Halley, who rents rooms by the hour to a clientele that does not expect pleasantness or cleanliness. Only a key that works and a door that locks. Mrs. Halley pays her own tribute to a different branch of the arrangement, not to Sullivan, but to the building inspector, to the ward heeler, to the network of small denomination corruption that holds the city's lower tiers in place, and passes some of the cost of this tribute to her hourly renters, which is one reason why Mrs. Halley's rooms cost 25 cents for what she euphemistically describes as a half-hour's rest, when on a normal night you would be spending 15 minutes in them. The 25 cents comes out of your end. The whole arithmetic of the evening is your arithmetic. What you take in, what goes to Mrs. Halley, what goes to Sullivan, what goes to Doyle's spontaneous assessments, what is left? What is left pays for the rooming house on 31st Street where you sleep, pays for the food that is never quite enough, pays for the coal that is never quite enough, saves incrementally towards some future state that is not fully defined but involves a different set of arrangements than these. You find Dutch at 2 a.m. at the same corner, which is where Dutch usually ends up by 2, not because she's waiting for more business, but because she likes the corner. She has said this, "I like this corner," in a way that is not ironic and not sad, just factual. She has been on this corner for many years and has views about it. Dutch is smoking a cigarette she rolled herself, the paper slightly damp from the cold air, the tobacco dark and strong-smelling. She hands it to you when you stop next to her, and you take a drag and hand it back, and neither of you says anything for a moment. Then Dutch says, "Sullivan's got a new man collecting on 26th. Who? Young kid. O'Halloran, something like that. He's been short-changing the women and pocketing the difference." Dutch draws on the cigarette, exhales slowly. Not Sullivan's arrangement. Sullivan doesn't know. Or Sullivan knows and is pretending not to know. Or Sullivan knows and is letting O'Halloran steal for a month before taking the money and the situation off him. Which do you think? Third option, Dutch says without hesitation. Sullivan's patient like that. You think about this. The arrangement has its own internal logic, its own rules about who can steal from whom and when. It is not chaos. It is a structured system with tolerated exceptions and intolerable exceptions, and the difference between the two categories is whether the theft flows upward or downward. Stealing from Sullivan is intolerable. Sullivan stealing from you is structural. O'Halloran stealing from the 26th Street women is somewhere between the two, and Sullivan's response will depend on whether it serves Sullivan's purposes to tolerate it or not. What do the women on 26th do, you ask? Nothing, Dutch says. What would they do? Pay O'Halloran twice, lose it once, or get arrested. They pay O'Halloran twice. A cart goes by on 7th. The horse is old. You can see it in the way it moves, the slight drag of the back left leg, a horse that has been working the night shift for years and is doing so now on habit and endurance rather than any particular energy. The driver, muffled in his coat, doesn't look at the street. He's been looking at this street for years too. I've been thinking, Dutch says, about getting out. Baltimore, you ask, and immediately feel bad about it, because that's Margaret, not Dutch. Dutch is from Manhattan, from specifically this district, born in a tenement on 24th Street when this part of the city was quieter and less valuable, and the arrangement was less elaborate. No, Dutch says, not Baltimore. I don't know where. Somewhere. She draws on the cigarette. There's a woman I knew who went to Chicago. Is she? She's fine. She writes sometimes. Says Chicago is colder but cheaper. Says the arrangement there is run through the aldermen instead of the police, which apparently makes it more negotiable. A pause. I don't know if that's better or worse. Different shape of the same thing. Different shape of the same thing. Dutch hands you back the end of the cigarette. Save me the last bit. You take a drag. The tobacco has gone bitter at this end, the way it does when a cigarette burns down too far. You hand it back. Dutch takes the last drag with the same focused attention she brings to most things. The thing nobody tells you, Dutch says, is that the arrangement is actually stable. I mean, that's the dark part of it. It's not some wild, dangerous thing that might blow up. It's reliable. You pay, you work, you pay, you work. It's reliable in the way that a prison is reliable. The walls don't move. You always know where you are. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, Dutch says. It's supposed to make you understand why people stay. She drops the cigarette stub on the cobblestones and steps on it with a worn boot heel. The sound is small and precise. Because at least you know what's coming, she says. On Sundays there is a different kind of time. The arrangement doesn't rest on Sundays. Sullivan doesn't take Sundays off. The corruption doesn't take Sundays off. But the pace of it changes. The saloons operate differently on Sundays, technically constrained by the excise law, which prohibits alcohol sales on Sunday, which in New York City means alcohol is sold through side doors and back windows, and the saloon is technically a hotel, and the beer is technically a meal. And none of the police constrain any of this because the police are also not taking Sundays off from the arrangement. But the women are taking Sundays off, at least from the street. You have developed a Sunday habit over 14 months that you guard more carefully than almost anything else, because it is yours, and it is not reducible to economics. You walk. You started walking on your second Sunday in the city because you had nowhere to be and nothing to spend, and the alternative was sitting in the rooming house room feeling the walls, and you've kept walking on Sundays because the city, approached on foot without purpose or urgency, is a different city than the one you work in. This Sunday you walk south and east and south again until you come to the approach to the Brooklyn Bridge. The Brooklyn Bridge in October 1878 is not yet open. It will not open until May of 1883, 4.5 years from now. But its towers are complete. The Manhattan Tower finished in 1876, the Brooklyn Tower in 1875, and the caissons sunk to bedrock, and the cables strung across the water in their graceful catenary, and the bridge itself slowly taking shape between the towers like something being knitted from steel. You can stand on the Manhattan side and look at it. The towers rise 276 feet above mean high water. They are, in 1878, the tallest man-made structures in the Western Hemisphere. They are built from limestone and granite, and in the morning light they are the colour of old bones or very pale honey, and they are so massive and so definite against the sky that looking at them requires a moment of recalibration. Your brain insists on scaling them down, insists they must be closer than they appear, smaller, because the size of them does not fit the ordinary scale of human things. They don't fit. They're not ordinary human scale. They are something else. John Roebling designed them. The elder Roebling, who died in 1869 from a tetanus infection he got when his foot was crushed by a ferry during the site survey. His son Washington Roebling took over, and then Washington Roebling was paralysed by caisson disease. The bends, we'd call it now, the condition that afflicts men who work under compressed air in the underwater foundations too long and surface too quickly. And so Washington Roebling has directed the construction since 1872 from his apartment window in Brooklyn Heights through binoculars, sending instructions through his wife Emily, who has become the de facto chief engineer in all but title. The men who built this thing, the women who drove it forward, and underneath it, in the caissons, the workers who got the bends in darkness and pressure, some of whom died, some of whom were paralysed, all of whom were paid the minimum that competitive desperation allowed. Every great thing built in this city was built by someone who was paid as little as possible, by someone who got as much of the credit as possible. You stand and look at the towers in the Sunday morning cold. From here you can see the East River, broad, grey-brown, the colour of winter coming. Tugs and ferries moving across it, smaller than the towers make them look. The Brooklyn waterfront on the other side, lower and less dense than Manhattan. The buildings giving way to sky more readily, the sky reflecting in the water so that the whole scene, sky, water, towers, the dim shapes of ships, seems to exist in two registers simultaneously, real above and echo below. The city stretches north behind you. You don't need to turn around to see it. You know it the way you know a room you've lived in for over a year, by the quality of the light it produces, the particular sound of its traffic, the smell of it coming off the stone on a cold morning. You know the Tenderloin is somewhere behind your left shoulder. You know Sullivan's precinct is 5 blocks north and 3 blocks west. You know Mrs. Halley's hourly room is 8 blocks north. You know every step between this spot and the rooming house on 31st, where your coat hangs on a nail and your few things are stored under the loose board beneath the bed. From here, none of that is visible. From here, you are just a person standing in front of a bridge, looking at towers. The wind off the river is different from the wind in the Tenderloin. The Tenderloin wind carries the district's smells with it. The saloons, the tenements, the horses, the coal. River wind has emptied itself of all that. River wind smells like water and distance, like the harbour beyond, like the Atlantic beyond that, like the fact that this city is on the edge of an ocean, and beyond the ocean are other places that are not this city. You stand there for a long time. You think about Dutch, who was born here and has never seen anything else. You think about Margaret in her red wallpaper room, thinking about Baltimore. You think about Cecilia, who was worried about her ankles and the ceiling, and whether the thing she was building toward anything. You think about the girl on the farm in Utica who read about New York in the newspaper and thought, that's where things happen. That's where I could become someone different. She was right. Things do happen here. You've become someone different. The difference is not what she imagined, but it is real, and it is yours. The towers of the Brooklyn Bridge catch the morning light. They have been under construction for 9 years. They will be finished in 5 more. The people who conceived them and some of the people who built them will be dead before the bridge opens. That's the thing about the very large constructions. They outlast the people who make them. You will not outlast these towers. Neither will Sullivan. Neither will Clubber Williams, wherever he is this morning with his precinct payments and his Connecticut house and his yacht. Everything under the sky, given enough time, becomes history. Even this, even you. It happens on a Wednesday night in November, 10 days after the Sunday at the bridge. You should say it happens to you because you failed to pay, or because you did something wrong, or because the arrangement broke down in some way that was your fault or your negligence. But it doesn't happen for any of those reasons. You paid. You have paid every Monday in the correct amount, handed over correctly, received by Sullivan without complaint for 14 months. It happens because Alderman Morrissey needs a newspaper story. Alderman Daniel Morrissey, 11th Ward, is running for re-election in the spring, and there is a challenger, a reform candidate backed by a Presbyterian minister who has been making speeches about the Tenderloin since August. The minister's speeches have been getting traction. Not with the ward's population. The ward's population mostly doesn't care about the minister or his speeches, but with the newspapers, and the newspapers are what shape the story of what the ward is, and the story of what the ward is shapes whether uptown voters pay attention to the 11th Ward's election. And uptown voters are the ones who decide whether Tammany's candidates hold their seats or lose them to reform. So Alderman Morrissey needs a newspaper story about vice being suppressed. He needs photographs. Well, illustrations. This is 1878. Photographs can't print in newspapers yet. He needs illustrations of police cleaning up the Tenderloin. He needs numbers. Women arrested. Houses closed. The machinery of enforcement visibly in motion. He talks to the inspector. The inspector talks to the precinct captain. The precinct captain calls in the sergeant. The sergeant puts extra officers on the Tuesday and Wednesday night shift. Nobody tells you this. Nobody tells Sullivan this officially, though he likely knows because he usually knows. If he knows, he does not warn the women on his patch, because warning them would require admitting that the arrangement exists and that the arrangement is about to be temporarily suspended, which would expose the arrangement. So you're standing on 27th Street on a Wednesday at 11:45 p.m. in the cold in your 2 big boots, watching your breath fog in the November air, and there are 2 officers coming up the block from the West End, moving with a speed and directness that is different from Doyle's Tuesday-Friday amble. You know, immediately that this is different. The first instinct is to walk. But walking fast is running, and running is confirmation of guilt, and guilt provides justification for a chase, and a chase on these cobblestones, in these boots, with these blistered heels. You don't run. You stand still. The officers are younger than Doyle, both of them, maybe 23, 24. Clean-shaven, which means new to the force. The older men all have moustaches, a kind of informal uniform of experience. One of them has the posture of a man who is slightly nervous. which makes him more dangerous than a man who is confident, because nervous men's hands do things before their heads catch up. You, the first one says. He points at you in a way that's unnecessary, since you are the only person standing at this spot. Section 887. Move along or come with us. Move along where, you say? This is not wisdom. You know it's not wisdom as you say it. But there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes over you at certain moments. Not physical exhaustion, though you're also physically exhausted, but a fatigue of the logic of it all, of the endless precise navigation of a system that moves its walls whenever it needs to, that takes your money and then arrests you anyway. That is not a thing you can outthink, because it is not a thinking thing. It is just a weight, just mass, just the accumulated dead weight of 40 years of institutional arrangement pressing down. Don't get smart, the second officer says. He doesn't say it with particular menace. He says it with the boredom of someone who has been saying it all night. And then you're walking. Hands not cuffed, which is a small mercy, but one of them is close behind you, and one of them is to your right, and the pace is not leisurely, and you are walking in the direction of the station house, and everything that follows from the station house, the street around you. The other women on the block have vanished with the speed of people who have developed, through necessity, a radar for exactly this kind of movement. You do not see them go. They are simply there and they're not there, which is a skill that you did not have when you arrived, and do not currently have the freedom to deploy. The Black Maria is on 30th Street, outside the station house. It is smaller than you imagined it would be the first time you saw it. You built it up into something larger in your mind, the way you build things up when you've been afraid of them at a distance. It's a black wooden box on wheels, drawn by two horses that stand with the patience of animals that have done this so many times that waiting is their default state. One of them shifts its weight. Its breath makes fog. There are already 3 women inside. Agnes Carver is one of them. She looks at you when you climb in with an expression that is not quite resignation and not quite sympathy. She's holding the edge of the bench with both hands, the wood smooth and cold through her gloves, and she nods very slightly when you sit down across from her. The door shuts. The darkness inside the Maria is not absolute. There are small ventilation slats near the roof, but it is close. The smell is close too. The wood of the box and the horses outside and the 4 of you inside and the cold and the iron fittings on the door. One of the women you don't know is crying quietly, not loudly, not desperately, just steadily. The way someone cries who's been crying for a while and has run out of the energy for dramatic grief but still can't stop. You don't say anything. None of you say anything. The Maria lurches into motion. The wheels on the cobblestones create a sound that reverberates inside the box, a grinding, rattling sound that you feel in your teeth, in your jaw, in the bones of your wrists where you're holding the bench. The sound combines with the smell and the dark to create a specific physical sensation that you already know, remember in this body for years. The journey is 4 blocks. It feels longer, the booking desk. You have thought, in the abstract, about what you would do if this happened. You have had this conversation with yourself, with Dutch, with others. You have always said, stay calm, give your name, the right name, the real name, because a false name creates complications and you do not want complications. Don't argue with a sergeant. Don't raise your voice. Don't give them anything that looks like resistance. You do all of this. You do it well, you think. Your voice is level. Your hands are still. The sergeant is a man named Connolly, who has been at this desk for 8 years, and who has the flat eyes of someone who has absorbed so much human misery that it has smoothed his affect out entirely. He writes your name in his ledger. Margaret Mary Coogan, 22, section 887, the holding cell. The smell you were imagining from the corner of 27th was correct. It is worse in person because smell is always worse in person than in imagination, but you were not imagining incorrectly. 7 women in the cell now, with you 8. The bench around the walls fits perhaps 10 comfortably, which means everyone currently fits but without comfort. You find a section of bench near the far wall and sit. The bench is cold. The wall behind it is cold. The wall is brick, painted with something that was once white and is now the colour of old dishwater. Agnes sits next to you. Her shoulder is warm. "Did you pay?" she asks quietly. "Yes, me too." A pause. "Morrissey," she says. "I know. It'll clear in the morning. I know." This is probably true. The arrests tonight are for the newspapers. The newspapers will have their story. Police crack down on vice in Tenderloin. Dozens arrested. And by 8 a.m, when the magistrate hears the cases, the political necessity that created the crackdown will have been served, and the magistrate will dismiss most of the charges because prosecuting all of them would create paperwork, and the Tammany system does not benefit from paperwork. Most, not all. The ones who haven't paid their tribute this month, those charges stick. It is a useful opportunity to collect on delinquent accounts through the mechanism of the criminal justice system, which is, when you look at it from a certain angle, elegant. A kind of late fee, administered by a judge. You paid, so you will probably be fine. The word probably sits in your chest and makes itself comfortable. The morning court. The Jefferson Market courthouse in early November morning is cold. The court is in the basement level, and the basement level does not receive direct sun, and the coal furnace that is supposed to heat it is apparently philosophical about its responsibilities. You've been awake for 19 hours. Your heels, in the 2 big boots, have moved from blistered to something past blistered, something that you will look at tonight when you finally take the boots off, with the grim interest of a person cataloguing damage. The magistrate is a man named Judge Voorhees, who is small and pink and has a magnificent white moustache that seems to belong to a man twice his size. He goes through the docket at the speed of someone who has a lunch appointment that he intends to keep. Case after case, name, charge, plea, fine or dismiss or continue. When he reaches your name, he looks at the paper, looks at you, looks at the paper. Coogan, Mary Coogan, section 887. He has a voice that carries in the room with no apparent effort. "Yes, Your Honour." Guilty or not guilty, you think for 1 second. You've thought about this before, the mechanics of it, the ethics of it, the particular cruelty of being asked to admit guilt for the crime of being on a public street. And you have arrived, as you always do, at the same place. "Not guilty, Your Honour." Voorhees' moustache moves in a way that might be surprise. Mostly women plead guilty. Mostly it's faster, less complicated, ends the thing. "Not guilty," Voorhees repeats. He writes something. "Continued, 2 weeks hence, November the 22nd. Bail set at $10 or release on recognizance." He looks at you over his glasses. "You have $10? "No, Your Honour." A pause. Something shifts almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not sympathy exactly, but possibly a brush of something in the neighbourhood of acknowledgement. That you're here for the wrong reasons on this. particular morning, that the docket today is thick with wrong reasons. Released on your own recognizance, he says. Don't miss the date. He moves to the next case. You stand in the corridor outside the courtroom and feel the cold air from the street door and breathe. It is 8:30 in the morning. You have been awake for 20 hours. You have not eaten since the cheese in your coat pocket at midnight, and the cheese was thin and dry, and not enough. Your heels hurt. Your back hurts. Your hands, holding each other in front of you in the cold corridor, are shaking slightly, which you decide is cold rather than the other thing, the thing that has been building in your chest since the Black Maria shut its door. You are free. You are on recognizance. In 2 weeks you will come back and the charge will most likely be dismissed. You're also 100% certain that Sullivan knows you're here. Sullivan always knows. Sullivan's information network runs through the precinct desk, through Doyle, through the other wardmen, through the saloon barmen and the rooming housekeepers, and the network of watchers that he has built over 6 years of meticulous attention. Sullivan will be curious about the not guilty plea. Not angry, just curious, watching, measuring. You walk out of the Jefferson Market courthouse into the November morning and turn north, toward 31st, toward the rooming house, toward the nail on the wall and the loose board under the bed. The city is awake around you, already fully awake, the delivery carts moving, the vendors setting up, the factory workers who started at 6, already 2 hours into their shifts. A woman is sweeping her stoop on Greenwich Avenue. A child is being hurried towards school by a man who looks like he's also supposed to be somewhere else. Ordinary morning, ordinary city. And you, walking through it with $19 in your pocket. You had 20. You paid the bail bondsman's preliminary fee to secure your release, even though you didn't need bail in the end, because the system charged you for services rendered before you knew you didn't need them, and the bondsman did not offer a refund, walking home in the 2 big boots, breathing the November air, not beaten, not destroyed, not gone. Here, Sullivan finds you the following Monday, not at the Continental, not through Doyle. Sullivan himself, which is unusual enough that you know before he opens his mouth that this is a different kind of conversation. He is on 26th Street, outside a druggist, which means he has positioned himself to intercept you on your way to the back bar. He falls into step beside you with the easy naturalness of a very large man who moves without apparent effort. You pled not guilty, he says. I paid, you say. I wasn't guilty. A short silence. The street noise around you. A cartman arguing with someone about a delivery. A woman calling from an upper window. The clatter of horses on cobblestones. All of it very loud. All of it very indifferent to this conversation. A lot of women paid, Sullivan says. They all pled guilty. They can decide for themselves. Sullivan walks beside you for another half block. His footsteps are very quiet for a man his size. You've noticed this before. He walks like someone who learned early that approaching people quietly gave him an advantage. The magistrate, Sullivan says, noticed you. I'll come back on the 22nd. The charge will be dropped. I know. Another half block. The thing is, Sullivan says, and his voice has a quality now that isn't quite a warning and isn't quite an explanation. It's something in between, something that expects you to understand without being told precisely. The thing is, when the machinery runs smooth, everyone benefits. When someone starts asking the machinery questions, the machinery gets unpredictable. You stop walking, Sullivan stops beside you. He doesn't look at you directly, but you can feel the quality of his attention. sideways, patient. I've been paying for 14 months, you say. I've been on time for 14 months. I paid on Monday, I paid correctly, and I was still arrested. That's the nature of the machinery. Then the machinery is broken. Sullivan is quiet for a moment. His hands are in his coat pockets. He's looking at the opposite building's facade with the thoughtful expression of a man who's about to make a point that he would prefer you to arrive at yourself, without him having to state it. The machinery, he says slowly, is the machinery. You can stand outside it and call it broken. You can go to the magistrate and plead not guilty and make notes and remember names. A pause. You can even go to the newspapers. Some people do. Another pause. And then the machinery looks at those people a little more carefully than it looks at everyone else. And they find they're getting arrested somewhat more frequently than they were before. And the bail's a little harder to make, and the charges somehow don't get dropped. He looks at you now, directly. Blue eyes, very calm, in a face that has the weathered look of someone who has spent decades outside. The machinery, he says, works best for people who work with it. He tips his hat. He continues walking east. You stand on 26th Street in the November cold and feel the weight of what just happened, pressing down through your coat, through your skin, into the bones. He wasn't threatening you. That's the thing that makes it worse. It wasn't a threat. It was an explanation. Here is how the world works. Here are the parameters. Here is what's available and what's not available. The machinery is not cruel. The machinery is indifferent. Its indifference is perfect and comprehensive, and has been built up over 40 years by hundreds of small decisions made by hundreds of men who each, individually, were just doing what was practical, what was profitable, what made sense within the system they were in. No one person built the system. Everyone is in it. 2 weeks later, on the 22nd, you go back to the Jefferson Market courthouse. The charge is dismissed. The magistrate, not Voorhees, a different magistrate, a man named Gaines, who has the air of someone who never wanted to be a magistrate and doesn't know how he got there. The magistrate reads the file, says dismissed, stamps it, moves on. It took 4 minutes. You walk back out onto Greenwich Avenue and turn north. The same street, the same cold, the same city. You go home. Let me take you forward. You need to know, because the history of it matters, and because the thing you're living inside right now, this system that feels as permanent as the cobblestones and the river, is not actually permanent, even though it feels that way at midnight in November with cold in your boots and a quarter missing from what Sullivan says you paid. It will be 16 years. 16 years from 1878. In 1894, a committee of the New York State Senate will begin hearings into corruption in the New York City Police Department. They'll be chaired by Senator Clarence Lexow, and they will take testimony for 7 months, and the testimony will be, for people who already knew about the arrangement, unsurprising. And for people who had somehow not known, and there were people in uptown New York, genuinely, who had not known, who believed that the police were police. For those people, the Lexow hearings were astonishing. Women will testify. Not many, not as many as should, because testifying requires courage of a specific kind. The courage of someone who has decided that the consequences of speaking are no worse than the consequences of silence, and for most people in the arrangement, that calculation does not resolve in favour of speaking. But some will testify. They'll describe, in specific detail, the tribute, the amounts, the wardmen, the Monday nights at the back bar, the quarters that were somehow always missing. They'll describe arrest by officers on orders from precinct captains, responding to orders from inspectors, responding to political calculations that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with who needed what headline in what week. They'll describe Sullivan, or men like Sullivan, the dozens of Sullivans in the dozens of precincts across the city. Clubber Williams will testify. He'll be asked about his Connecticut house, his yacht, his assets far exceeding any possible legitimate salary. He'll say, memorably, that he made money through speculation in Japanese real estate. The committee will record this without visible amusement. Williams will be tried by a departmental board and fined 30 days' pay, and will retire from the force shortly after. He will keep the house. He will keep the yacht. The Japanese real estate explanation will pass into New York City legend as a specimen of audacity so complete it circles around to being almost admirable. The Tammany machine will be weakened by the Lexo hearings, not destroyed, weakened. A reform mayor will be elected, a man named William Strong, who will appoint Theodore Roosevelt as one of the police commissioners in 1895. Roosevelt will be 36 years old, energetic in a way that borders on alarming, and genuinely committed to reform in a way that the machine politicians find not only annoying, but actually incomprehensible, because the system they operate in has no category for someone who is not operating through it. Roosevelt will stay for 2 years. He will fire corrupt officers, require that the force enforce the Sunday excise law, introduce merit-based promotion concepts. He will personally walk beats at night to catch officers sleeping. It will be, for those 2 years, slightly less profitable to run a precinct. Then Roosevelt will leave for Washington, because there are other things he wants to do, and because 2 years of New York City police reform is apparently enough for anyone. And the machine will reassemble itself, not in exactly its old form. The Lexo hearings will have introduced enough public awareness that the most blatant arrangements will become at least somewhat more discreet, but in recognizable form. The arrangement will never be fully eliminated, not by Lexo, not by Roosevelt, not by the next set of hearings, the Seabury Commission, in the 1930s. Not by the Knapp Commission in 1970, which will investigate essentially the same pattern of corruption in essentially the same city 60-plus years later, and reach essentially the same conclusions. Some systems are very durable, but here's what also happens in those 16 years between 1878 and 1894. A journalist named Jacob Riis, Danish immigrant, police beat reporter for the New York Tribune, will spend years in the same streets you're walking. He'll go into the panel houses and the stale beer dives and the basement tenements. He'll learn to use a new technology, flash powder photography, that lets him bring light into places that have never been photographed before. He'll carry his camera into the darkest streets at midnight, accompanied by police and sanitation inspectors, and he'll photograph what's there. In 1890, his book How the Other Half Lives will be published. It will contain photographs and descriptions of conditions in the city's worst tenements, and the worst streets that will shock the uptown readers who've been sharing a city with these conditions for decades without looking at them. Riis will not be a perfect man or a perfect journalist. He will have blind spots, biases, views of poverty that contain condescension alongside compassion. But the photographs will be real. The street will be real. The woman in the red wallpaper room will be real. The girl in the 2 big boots standing on 27th Street in the November cold will be recognizable to anyone who reads the book. And the Lexo hearings will happen, in part, because enough people in enough places read books like Reese's and looked at photographs like Reese's and thought, this is not acceptable. You won't know about any of this in 1878. You won't be there for the hearings, probably. 16 years is a very long time when you're 22 and surviving on a day-to-day calculation of how much you have and how much the arrangement costs. But it happens. Eventually a version of it changes. The city is always changing. The machinery is always being adjusted. The corruption is always being somewhat reformed, and then somewhat re-established, and then somewhat reformed again, in a long, slow rhythm like the tide coming in and going out on a long, shallow shore. The women in those streets, not you specifically, but all the yous, all the Marys and Dutches and Margarets and Agnesses, they become part of the public record. Their testimony when they give it. Their stories when Rees and the other journalists tell them. Their existence as evidence of what the arrangement actually cost in human terms, beyond the money and the politics. The arrangement wanted them to be invisible, to be the machine's lubricant, present and necessary and unseen. They weren't invisible. They're in the record. So are you. The room on 31st Street is on the 3rd floor. Window faces north, which means on winter mornings you never get direct sun, only the grey reflection of light off the building opposite. The building opposite is a tenement, 6 stories, 43 families by. The landlord's count, probably 50 by anyone who has actually been through it. On winter mornings its windows are fogged with the breath and the cooking steam and the compressed living warmth of a building that holds more people than it was designed to hold, and the fog turns orange gold in the angled morning light, and occasionally through the fog you can see a face. Children sometimes, a woman hanging something in a window, a man looking out the way people look out of windows when they are thinking about something else entirely. Your room contains a bed, iron frame, mattress that needs to be turned every month, and that you turn every month because the springs on the left side have given out, and if you don't turn it, you wake up with a back that speaks to you in specific terms about your life choices. A washstand with a basin and a pitcher that you fill from the hall tap once a day, sometimes twice, depending on how much work there is to do and how cold it is, because in November the hall tap runs cold enough that washing your face is a small act of determination rather than a habit. A nail in the wall for your coat, a hook beside the door for other things, a wooden box under the bed where you keep your things, a second dress, a clean shift, the 3 letters your mother has sent in 14 months in her careful school-learned handwriting, describing Utica, the winter, the neighbours, always ending with a question she never quite directly asks. Are you well? Are you getting on? Your cousin Thomas has a position with the railroad. Perhaps Thomas could not. Thomas doesn't know what would be required of Thomas. Thomas is 24 and works the railroad out of Buffalo and lives in a boarding house full of other railroad men and has a life that is legible in a way yours is not because it's better than yours, but because it fits in the categories of things people know how to understand. You write your mother back once a month and say, yes, am well, am managing, working as a seamstress still, which is true in the sense that you still have the needle skills and the technical knowledge of garment work, and could theoretically return to a factory, and not true in the more obvious sense of what your work actually is. Your mother does not ask follow-up questions. Either she knows and cannot bring herself to say it, or she has decided not to know. which is a kind of mercy that you accept without naming it. The evening after the court date, the November 22nd, you sit on your bed in the room on 31st and take off the two big boots. The heels of your stockings are dark. You peel back the stocking from the right heel with care because the blister has opened somewhere in the walking of the last several weeks and the fabric has adhered to it. It takes a moment of attention and a specific quality of grimacing, and then it comes free. The heel is raw, not dramatically, not requiring more than cold water and air, but raw. The skin tender and bright and protesting its conditions. You fill the basin from the pitcher. Cold water, obviously, cold enough to make you hiss when your feet go in, but cold is also clean, and clean is what you need, and after a moment the cold stops registering as painful and becomes simply a quality of the water, present but no longer sharp. You sit on the edge of the bed with your feet in the cold basin and look at the ceiling. The ceiling has a water stain in one corner from where the roof leaked last spring. The landlord, Mr. Dolan, said he would fix it. The ceiling still shows the stain. This has been your relationship with Mr. Dolan for 14 months. He says things will be fixed and they are not fixed. But he also doesn't raise your rent and doesn't ask too many questions and doesn't comment on the hours you keep, which are the things that matter. The water in the basin has gone the temperature of your feet. From the street 4 floors down you can hear 7th Avenue, the carts, the horses, a man shouting something about God and degradation from somewhere to the east, which might be a preacher and might be a drunk, and is not something you feel the need to investigate. The gas lamp outside your window creates an orange edge around the curtain. From the building opposite, the smell of someone's supper, onions, salt pork, something baked. You think about the bread, the bakery on 25th, the one Dutch showed you, the one that starts its ovens at 11 p.m, and whose yeast and heat smell reaches even to the corner in the night cold. You are hungry, not desperately, not in the way of the bad weeks in 1877, not with the shaking hands and the light-headedness of actual starvation, just hungry in the ordinary way of a person who ate bread this morning and cheese at midnight and nothing in between because the morning was the station house and the courthouse and the long walk home. There's a piece of cold cornbread in the wooden box. You ate half of it this afternoon, standing in the room, because you needed something immediately and the cornbread was there. The other half is still there. It is somewhat less appetizing than it was this afternoon. Cornbread's window for being good is narrow and you have missed it. But it is calories and it exists. You eat it sitting on the bed with your feet in the cold water and the orange curtain edge and the street sounds coming up from below. It is, in its way, enough. Dutch is not her real name. Her real name is Wilhelmina Hard. She is 40 years old. She was born in a tenement on 24th Street when this part of Manhattan was still mixed residential. Working-class families, small businesses, not yet the district it became. Her father was a butcher. Her mother took in laundry. They lived 4 floors up in a building that no longer exists, replaced by a rooming house in 1872. Dutch's father died when she was 14. Cholera, the last major outbreak, 1866. Her mother took in more laundry. Dutch took whatever work she could find, factory work, kitchen work, the kind of exhausting low-wage labour that existed in infinite supply for a girl with no education, beyond basic reading, and no connections beyond the neighbourhood. She was on the streets at 18, not because anything dramatic happened, because the arithmetic didn't balance. and because the streets were there, and because at 18 in 1856 the arrangement was already running, already established, already extracting its weekly payment in exchange for the right to work without constant arrest. Dutch has been paying Sullivan or Sullivan's predecessors for 22 years. 22 years. You think about that number sometimes. Not with pity. Dutch does not want pity, and you've learned not to offer it, but with a kind of mathematical attention that you can't entirely suppress. 22 years of $1.50 a week, or whatever the rate was in 1856, is a specific quantity of money. It is an enormous quantity of money, extracted from a woman who earned it through labour, transferred to a system that used it to perpetuate its own ability to extract more. Dutch has never owned property, has never saved enough for anything that could be called security, has twice been to Blackwell's Island and come back and started over, has outlasted 5 precinct captains and 3 wardmen, and God knows how many individual collectors like Doyle. She's still here, still on the corner, still knowing things. You know what I figured out? Dutch told you once, about 6 months after you started on the block. She had the tone she sometimes had, a philosophical Dutch tone, when she was going to say something that she'd arrived at through a very long route of personal experience. I figured out that the system takes what you'd save anyway. What do you mean? The money, the tribute, whatever you'd save, the amount that would build up to something. That's what they charge, not more, not less. They charge the exact amount that keeps you from getting ahead. She looked at you steadily. You ever notice? The rate isn't arbitrary. It's calibrated. It's calibrated to the margin. You had noticed this. You'd noticed it, and hadn't had words for it, and now you did. So it's designed to keep us here, you said. Not designed, Dutch said. That's what I mean. It evolved. Over 40 years, it evolved to the exact rate that maximizes extraction while minimizing the number of women who leave. She paused. Because if too many women leave, the supply decreases, the tribute decreases, and the thing stops working. They need us to be here. They just need us to be here without anything. You thought about this for a long time. So the way out, you said slowly, is to somehow save faster than the system can calibrate. Or to leave entirely, Dutch said. Chicago, Baltimore, somewhere the arrangement hasn't reached yet. Has it reached everywhere? Dutch laughed. It was not a happy laugh. Everywhere that's big enough to have police, she said. It's past midnight again. The November air has the sharp, particular quality of nights that are moving toward the first freeze. Not there yet, but threatening. The cold with an edge that wasn't there last week. A cutting cold that finds the gaps in your coat and works its way in with patience. You're on the corner. The orange gas lamp makes its circle. The Emerald Garden 2 blocks north is spilling its last customers into the street. The saloon closing at 12:30 as it does every night. The men and the waitress girls dispersing in their various directions. From here, you can sometimes hear the last notes of the orchestra. A few bars of something you don't know the name of that drift down the block in the cold air. You're thinking about the bread, the bakery smell. You're thinking about Agnes, who is, you've heard through the informal network of information that runs through this block, considering going to her sister in Philadelphia. The sister has a husband who works at a tannery. The sister has written to say there might be room if Agnes wants to come. Agnes has been saying she might for 3 months. The might is the hardest part. The might is where most of the decision lives, in the gap between knowing what you want and committing to the thing that leads there. It is easier to stay. easier is a kind of gravity. You think about Dutch, who has been on this corner for 22 years. You think about Margaret, who thinks about Baltimore. You think about yourself, Mary Coogan, 22, from Utica, standing on a cobblestone street in Manhattan with blisters on your heels and $19 in your pocket, and the whole machinery of the city pressing down from above. You're not Dutch. You're not Margaret. You're not Agnes. You're yourself. And the thing about being yourself, you have decided, or been deciding slowly, in the way that decisions are made when you don't have time to sit down and decide things formally. The thing about being yourself is that you're still in the process of becoming yourself. The 22-year-old on this corner is not the finished version. She is the version that survived the factory closing and the basement room on Mulberry Street and the first Monday at Sullivan's back bar and the November arrest and the cold that takes your feet past numb and out the other side. She is, in specific and non-metaphorical terms, still here. There is something in that. You don't have clean language for it, and you don't need clean language for it. It is a physical fact. The way the cold cobblestones under your boots are a physical fact. You are still here. That means something. The exact thing it means is not yet determined. It depends on choices that you will make, are making, in this month, in this year, in the years past, the 5 you've committed to the idea of staying in New York. It depends on things outside your control. The economy, the machine, Sullivan's moods, the political calculations of men who will never learn your name. But you're the one standing on the corner. You're the one who breathed in through your nose and found the bread smell through all the other smells. That's something. Come home with me now. Let's walk back up 7th Avenue North, through the Tenderloin's last hour. The saloons are thinning out. The concert halls have closed. The waitress girls in their green and red uniforms are walking home in pairs, their arms linked, talking in low voices about their evenings. A horse-drawn car is still running on 7th, the last car of the night, nearly empty. A few men slumped on the wooden seats with the specific posture of people who've been awake too long and will sleep wherever the car takes them. The cobblestones at this hour have a specific quality of wet shine. The humidity condensed on the stone, not quite frost, not quite rain, just the particular moisture of a November night that is deciding whether to commit to winter. Under your boots, the stone, cold, the slight irregularity of old cobblestones that have been pried up and relaid a dozen times, each relaying slightly different from the last, so that the street is a palimpsest of every repair it's ever received. You know these stones. You know the particular loose one on the corner of 27th that rocks slightly when you step on the left side, and the long smooth section on 7th where the pavement was replaced last spring, and the rough patch near the saloon where someone replaced cobblestones with broken brick and never went back to fix it properly. You know this street the way you know the room on 31st, by the imperfections, by the places that give and the places that hold. The rooming house on 31st is locked at 1 a.m, but Mr. Dolan, who is not without his small mercies, has a loose board at the back of the building that he has never gotten around to fixing, which everyone who keeps the hours of this neighbourhood knows about, and which Mr. Dolan knows they know about, and which has achieved the status of an unofficial arrangement in the style of all unofficial arrangements. Everyone sees it, no one names it, it functions without acknowledgement. You ease through the back, replace the board, go up the stairs in the dark. The stairs creak on the 3rd step and the 7th step and the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors. which you navigate by memory, stepping wide on the third step, stepping close to the wall on the seventh, a specific shuffle of the foot on the landing that avoids the loudest board. You do this in absolute dark. You could do it in your sleep. In some sense, you already do. The room, the coat goes on the nail, the boots, carefully, the right heel with extra attention, come off and go by the door. Your feet on the bare wooden floor, cold, immediate, the grain of the wood, the dust in the grain. The basin on the washstand is still cool. You splash water on your face, the cold of it a brief shock, and then a relief, and the water running down your neck and the familiar smell of the room around you. Wood, coal, your own things, the faint exterior smell of the city coming through the window frame. You don't light a candle. There's no reason to. The orange edge around the curtain from the gas lamp below provides enough to navigate by. You've learned to move in low light. Another of the 14 months lessons. The bed creaks when you sit on it. The spring on the left side protests in its familiar way. You shift right toward the wall and the mattress settles under you. Outside, the city is quieter now, but not silent. It will not be silent. Not at 2 a.m., not at 3, not at 4. The city has a different kind of noise at this hour, deeper, slower. The night sounds underneath the day sounds that only come through when the day sounds have stopped. A boat horn from the Hudson, far away. A dog somewhere on the block. The creak of the building itself, the timbers contracting in the cold, the building breathing. You lie down, the thin blanket over you. The cold of the room in the way that cold gets into a room in November. Not the cold of outside, not quite, but the cold of a room that has been holding the temperature of its stone walls and its uninsulated windows. The cold that the building absorbs through the night, and that bodies must fight back. Your body fights it. Slowly, the blanket warms. The mattress conforms to your shape in its familiar, imperfect way. Your eyes are heavy, not the fighting sleep of a restless night, the real kind, the kind that comes when the body has spent everything it had and is now politely but firmly insisting on repair. The city outside, the orange curtain edge. Think about what you know. You know the weight of a bolt of fabric, not because you sell it, but because you carried it. The one time you helped Cecilia move supplies from the Emerald Garden to storage. The weight of a thing that seems light until you've carried it up 3 flights of stairs. You know the sound the Black Maria makes on cobblestones, the way it enters your bones through the bench. You know the smell of Sullivan's precinct in November, the institutional smell of the booking room, the particular coldness of the holding cell bench. You know the yeast and heat smell of the bakery on 25th at 2 in the morning, coming through the cold air like something that refuses to be cancelled by everything else. You know the texture of the worn wood at Sullivan's back bar, the smoothness where elbows have polished it, the stickiness at the edges. You know the way ice feels on the coin you hand under Sullivan's hand in the Continental, cold and then gone. You know what Dutch looks like when she is being Dutch, and what she looks like when, very rarely, she is being Wilhelmina. A softness around the eyes, a momentary loosening of the flat effect armour that she wears surely as she wears her coat. You know what the bridge towers look like in early morning light when the wind off the river is emptied of everything but salt and distance. You know these things. You know them in your body, in the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet, and the specific way your back aches at the end of a long day, and the specific pleasure of cold water on a hot summer day, and the specific heaviness of a blanket pulling you toward warmth. All of this is yours. The system took what it could take. It took money, consistently, reliably, with the meticulous efficiency of a machine built over 40 years by men who understood that money was the thing that converted labour into power. It couldn't take this. The things in your body, the things you've seen and touched and smelled and navigated and survived, those are yours. The ceiling, dimly visible, the water stain in the corner, the orange edge of the curtain, your breath in the cold room slowing. You've been awake today for nearly 22 hours. The courthouse in the morning, cold and bored and frightening in its bureaucratic casualness. The walk home, the afternoon, the evening on the block, the walk back, the stairs in the dark. 22 hours of the city pressing down. The city is pressing down on 100,000 people at this hour, on the women in the other corners, on the factory girls who will wake at 5 for the 6 a.m. shift, on the men sleeping under the bridge approaches and the women in the basement tenements on Mulberry Street, and the children crowded into rooms designed for 2 and holding 9, on the watermen sleeping in their boats, on the newsboys who will be at the printing presses in 3 hours, waiting for the morning papers, everyone pressing back. That's what cities are, maybe. The pressure and the pressing back. The machine and the people inside it, and the machine taking what it can take, and the people keeping the rest. The blanket warms, the building breathes, the Hudson River, 4 blocks west, flows in the dark toward the harbour and the open ocean. It has been flowing there since before the city existed. It will flow there when the city is something else entirely, when these cobblestones are history, when the gas lamps are curiosities in a museum, when the arrangement is an academic subject studied by people who will look at the numbers and think, how did they live like that? They lived like this. Like you, one day, one cold room, one blistered heel, one piece of cornbread, one quarter that was never really missing. They live by finding the bread smell through everything else, by knowing which stair to step wide on, by standing on a Sunday in front of towers that were still being built and breathing river air and thinking, I am here, I am still here. Your eyes are closed. The sounds of the city, distant, softer, moving to a frequency you can still hear, but no longer need to respond to. The orange light through the curtain, warm, steady, the gas lamp's long watch, the cold of the room, managed, held back, the blanket's small defence, your body, horizontal, the accumulated weight of it released into the mattress. Let the city be the city. Let Sullivan have his Monday. Let the machinery run. It will still be running tomorrow. But right now, in this room, in this specific stillness, centuries will pass. The Tenderloin will change beyond recognition. The concert saloons will close. The gas lamps will be replaced by electric ones, and then by LEDs that never flicker. The cobblestones will be buried under asphalt, then dug up again by people who find them beautiful. The police department will be reformed and corrupted and reformed and corrupted in its long, slow rhythm, the tide going in and out on the same shore. The Jefferson Market courthouse will become a library branch. A library! The building where women were fined for the crime of standing on a public street will hold public books for anyone to borrow. Blackwell's Island will be renamed. Roosevelt Island. They'll put a tram to it from the city. People will live there by choice, in apartments with views, and ride the tram into Manhattan for work, and the tram will pass directly over the spot where the Women's House of Detention stood. The system, not just this city's system, not just this century's system, but the pattern of it. the extraction from the most vulnerable by those with the authority to extract, the pattern will persist in different forms, with different names, in different cities. The machinery finds new shapes, but so do the people inside it. The women who testified before the Lexo Committee, the women who told Reese what their streets looked like, the women who wrote down what they knew and told who they could tell, and refused to plead guilty to the crime of surviving in a city that wanted their labour without their visibility. They're in the record. You're in the record. Not because of what the system did to you. The system did what systems do, without particular malice, with perfect indifference, with the mechanical efficiency of 40 years of practice. You're in the record because you breathed through your nose and found the bread smell, because you stood in front of the bridge towers and let them be enormous, because you walked up the stairs in the dark by memory and made it home. The room holds you, the city holds the room, the century holds the city. Time holds all of it, eventual, patient, the way the river holds everything that has ever passed over it. Lightly, without judgment, in water that is always moving and never the same water twice. Sleep, that's all now. No more tonight. You've counted the stairs and found the corner of your bed and the cold water and the bread smell through everything. You've earned this. The darkness is warm enough. The building is breathing. Let it breathe. Let sleep come the way it came for Mary Coogan in her room on 31st Street in November of 1878. Slow, quiet, arrived at through a very long day. Let the sounds fade. Let the orange curtain edge be just light now, just colour, not a city, not a lamp. Let your hands rest, let your feet rest. Let the machinery run without you for these few hours. It will still be there in the morning. So will you. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. Good night. Good.